Hi, this is Peter Purvis. You're listening to the Sirens of Audio. Hope you enjoy what you're going to hear.
I am Dwayne of the Sirens of Audio. I am power beyond your imagining. Surrender to me what is mine by right of conquest. Give me your subscription. Never! Then you shall be given over to the podcast and become the subscribers from hell. G'day audiophiles, this is the Sirens of Audio, the show that explores the universe of Doctor Who and other cult TV and the audio medium. My name's Dwayne.
I'm Philip, and we've also got with us...
Hello, I'm Simon Guerrier.
Thanks for joining us, Simon. Really appreciate you coming on. Of course, you've written a lot for Jean Marsh, which is the topic of our podcast today, because sadly we had the news earlier in the week that Jean had passed away. But we wanted to not dwell on the loss as much as celebrate her life. So thanks for coming and joining us.
My pleasure. What a pleasure to do this and, as you say, celebrate her amazing life and career.
Indeed.
Absolutely. So normally we do a few things when we do our reviews. So we're going to do things a little bit differently. Philip has a little segment that he likes to call the facts and the trivia. I like it when he calls it that too, Philip. But instead of talking about the stories like we're going to do, Philip, you've got some facts and trivia about Jean Marsh, the actress.
I do. So let's do the Jean Marsh, the facts and the trivia. She was born Jean Lindsay Torrance Marsh on July 1st, 1934, and died April 13, 2025, age 90. She grew up with her parents and sister in London, and she studied ballet, singing and acting from a very early age. Her career began in the 1950s, making many appearances on stage and in both British and American TV. Some of these included The Twilight Zone. With Laurence Olivier, she was in The Moon and Sixpence. She also was in Danger Man, I Spy and The Saint. In 1955, she married John Pertwee, who would later become the Third Doctor. But it was not a happy marriage, and they divorced in 1960. She would never marry again, although she did have long-term relationships with at least Albert Finney, Kenneth Haig, both actors, and director Michael Lindsay Hogg. In 1965, Jean made the first of 3 appearances in Doctor Who, playing Lady Johanna, sister of King Richard the Lionheart. This was in the episode The Crusade, opposite William Hartnell and Julian Glover playing her brother. This is a very strong, almost Shakespearean performance, with an episode of which can still be seen. Jean and Julian got into the trouble, though, with the producer for emphasising a suspected incestuous relationship between king and sister, and were forced to tone it down. Later in the same year, Jean would return to Doctor Who for 9 episodes of the Daleks Masterplan. Acting in the role of companion, she would die horribly on screen. She had also killed her on-screen brother, Brett Ryan, in her first episode, played by Nicholas Courtney, who she worked with on Doctor Who again later. In 1971-74, she co-created the hit TV show Upstairs Downstairs. This was both a critical and popular success. Jean had wanted to do this show after watching the Forsyte saga and wondered how this bunch of rich people all got fed and looked after. She was also able to bring in some of her working class background and beliefs, and this show won numerous awards. Her film, television and stage career continued with notable performances in Who Dares Wins, Return to Oz and Willow. In 1989, she returned to Doctor Who opposite Sylvester McCoy, Sophie Aldred and Nicholas Courtney, now the Brigadier, not her brother, in the show Battlefield, playing the evil Morgana. In the 1990s, she co-created another hit show, The House of Elliot, and this time, although not acting in it, she wrote a number of episodes. In 2007, Jean would record her first big finish, The Wishing Beast. But it was in 2008 when she reprised the role of Sara Kingdom that fandom was overjoyed. She went on to record numerous plays, including Home Truths, The Drowned World, The Guardian of the Galaxy, and The Reknowned, all for the Companion Chronicles range, all written by Simon here. She also recorded The Five Companions and The Light at the End as specials, and for the Early Adventure range, An Ordinary Life and The Sontarans, also by Simon. Nearly all her stories were written by Simon Guerrier. Her final release for Big Finish was in 2016. In 2010, she had revived Upstairs Downstairs and appeared in some of the episodes. Till suffering a small stroke, she was unable to work and finish as many episodes as she wanted. Unfortunately, for the final years of her life, Jean Marsh suffered from dementia, which she would finally die from due to complications. Jean Marsh had certainly lived no ordinary life, and this is just a few of the facts and trivia about Jean Marsh.
Yeah, thank you very much, Philip. There would be many, many more facts out there that would be fascinating too, but those were just a few. I just wanted to pick up on one of the early appearances that has really stood out to me over the years, and that's her appearance in The Twilight Zone. I was shocked when I first saw that episode because that would have been around 1959, so she still would have been married to John Pertwee at the time, wouldn't she? Going through that tumultuous time, but a fantastic episode, and what a beautiful lady that she was. She played that role to perfection. I think she was playing an android in that episode. Do you guys remember seeing that at all? Simon, what about yourself?
Yes, yeah, I'm a big fan of The Twilight Zone. I had seen that when I met her and worked with her, so we talked about it. Her main memories were working in Death Valley, and the extraordinary address she had. She remembered. I think she, as you say, she was married to John Pertwee, so she had to give him her address, and it was something like, Desolation Hotel, End of the World, Death Valley, whatever. And that really struck her because it was funny. That's the thing that she kind of had an impish delight in telling these slightly funny stories, and was really, because she was quite quiet and a little shy, but loved telling a story that would shock you. So she was slightly naughty, and she loved the idea of this Twilight Zone episode because it's about a romance between a prisoner and his robot girlfriend. And she just thought the practicalities of that are never seen on screen were really funny. Like, what do they actually get up to? What is this robot capable of? And you quite, I can remember sat having a cup of tea in the green room at Big Finish as she sort of went through this, crying with laughter as she went through it. So yeah, she was very she was just such fun to be around. And that episode, and I thought, because you meet actors and you kind of go, I want to talk about the dodgy sci-fi things that you did, not the really impressive stage roles. And she was quite happy to talk about Twilight Zone. She had nice memories of Rod Serling. She had views on the kind of that it's quite a misogynistic story and of its time and this kind of thing. But she had views on all of that. Quite happy to chat about it, just as much as she was happy to chat about Upstairs Downstairs and her stage work and whatever else. So yeah, and she liked the variety. That was the thing. That's you listed her sort of career as this great long thing, but she did everything under the sun. She played. She told me with great pride that she'd played 9 witches, which just tickled her. Yeah, and the Twilight Zone was just one of the amazing things that she was in.
One of my first memories of her in sort of standing out to me was in Willow, when she's playing one of those 9 witches, because Willow I was just the right age for that fantasy show to come out, but being quite terrified by her performance. And later when I recognised her from Doctor Who, I realised, that's from the woman from Willow. So it was a very strong performance she gave there, and she just was happy to go slightly over the top if the part required, but also she knew how to be so subtle. I mean, the other show that I loved doing was just Upstairs Downstairs,
Mhm.
because playing Rose, I forget the other name, but just Rose, because that was such an amazing, clever show, and it gave me such an interesting view of life in terms of Great Britain. And I think it was the first time there'd been a big focus on the downstairs crew, and they had as big a storyline as the upstairs people.
I think the really clever thing about Upstairs Downstairs is it's about the two worlds and how they mix. And so something that happens in the drawing room of the house has an impact on the people working in the kitchen, and vice versa. And that you know the family and those kind of dynamics and the people who come in are affected by all of these things. I think there's an amazing early episode which it is, I think it's sort of 4 or 5 in. It's one of the black and white ones, and it's about a dinner party, and they've got people coming in for the dinner, and everybody's very stressed, and everybody's kind of worried about it, whether that's below stairs or above stairs, and all of the kind of niceties that have to be observed, and all of the kind of power politics of who is senior to who in social standing, and all of this kind of stuff. And then, almost innocuously, there's a moment where a maid goes to knock on a door of one of the guests and opens the door, and you just get a glimpse of one man sat in a chair and another man kneeling in front of him. Cuts to the maid's shocked expression, and you go to an advert. And as an audience, you're just sat there going, "What did I just see? What did I just What was that?" And then we come back, and the house is all going, "What just happened?" Nobody knows what did she see, what happened, what went on. And obviously, it's a story about a homosexual act in the household but it's between two people who are not of the same social standing, and what then happens and whatever. But it's all about what you didn't see, and it's a properly amazing bit of television. Really bold, really using the medium really well, and getting you engaged in it. But it's all about the way an incident like that travels through the whole system of the house. Amazing bit of telly. And I talked to her about that, and she just said, well, we weren't allowed to show anything because of there's the limitations of what you could put on TV at the time. And she said, so we went as far as we could, but actually made a virtue of not being able to show stuff. So yeah, she amazing woman.
Yeah, so yeah, it's a great show. And she created, I think Downton Abbey probably has a lot to thank Upstairs Downstairs for.
Oh,
Which was done.
She had views on that. She was not a fan of Downton Abbey. She was quite forthright about that.
Did she feel that stolen from her, or just the way they took it a bit more soapy?
I think my memory is she just thought it was dreadful. She thought it was badly written and wasn't very real, and was too much about how everybody loved the posh lot, which she just said wasn't the experience of real people. She was. I can remember her being quite hardcore about that.
So when did you first meet Jean, and in what context, and how did that first meeting go?
So I met her in March 2009 at the recording of The Drowned World, which was the second play I wrote for her for Big Finish. I wrote the first one in 2008, and I wasn't able to go to the recording because I was away on holiday at the time. In fact, that actually made things better, because what can happen when you turn up at recordings, especially if you're a dorky, socially awkward writer, is that you kind of stand in the corner awkwardly and wait your moment to be introduced and don't know how to do things. Whereas to arrive at the second one when the first story had come out and had been well received we were all kind of buzzing that this had worked and people liked it. So she and Niall, the other actor in it, and everybody was pleased, and so I was kind of welcomed and embraced. And she had views on how it was written and what I'd done, and did I want her to play it this way, or did I want that, or whatever, which doesn't always happen. But yeah, so I was kind of like welcomed in, and it was great, and she was very friendly and fun. I subsequently discovered that she was very shy, and could take a bit of time to warm to people, but I kind of skipped that stage. So yeah, it was great, and she was just fantastic. I mean, she was so on it and knew what to do and had ideas about how to play it and things, and responded very well to Lisa directing. And she got on with Niall very well, Niall McGregor, who's the other actor in it, who I think it helped that he was very good as well and very pretty. And they were like, they just sparked off each other in studio and outside it. They were great. They knew a lot of the same actors, and so there's a bit of delightfully spicy gossip about various people. So it's just fun. It was just great to sort of sit with them and be in their gang, really.
I could tell from the extras that I was trying to put a word on it. That there's certain type of sense of humor that she's got, and you put it very well when you said impish.
Yeah,
and I thought, yes, that's exactly what I picked up from her. So that would have been really nice to be around. I thought that'd be a lot of fun to be had in her presence, I think.
Yeah. So one of the things that she loved was that the Drowned World was recorded. So between Home Truths being recorded and The Drowned World being recorded, Matt Smith had been announced as the new Doctor Who, which shows you how long ago this was. And Niall was mates with Matt Smith, and they'd been in Party Animals together. And they were of the same age and of that generation that didn't really know Doctor Who. So he didn't really know what he was coming into with these audio plays. So he said to Jean, as we're setting up for the Drowned World, so this old guy, the Doctor, he's an older version of the character Matt's playing. Is that right? And Jean took great delight in going, oh no, darling, Matt is playing a younger version of this old guy. And took great delight in Niall just being completely boggled by this, going, what on earth are you talking? And she was kind of she delighted in that. She delighted in my I must have done a face when she started talking about being married to John Pertwee, and told some things that I won't repeat here because they're not really suitable for a family audience, but made me laugh and laugh, just about how rubbish men can be and stuff. But so so she loved that kind of. She had a lot of what's the word? I think you can see it in her the roles she played, whether she's playing a witch with magic powers or she's playing a servant. There's a lot of power in her characters, a lot of determination, and that's what makes them so compelling to watch, because they're kind of they are going to get what they are aiming for, and are not going to let people get in the way. But she loved just making the effect of what she said. She loved that, and once she knew that I giggled, I was just a victim of that. She dropped these little bombs into conversation.
Actually, just on the effect of what she said, could we jump back for a few minutes? I just want to get both your thoughts on her 60s appearances in Doctor Who, because I remember, I think I may have seen the Crusade on one of those V8 bootleg copies that was going around. So it was, 20th generation, so you couldn't make it out anyway. But when it was released on the Hartnell years, that was introduced by Sylvester McCoy as The Wheel of Fortune, that scene between she and Julian Glover, that dialogue in that particular episode had me electrified. And this is me, how many years later was it? 30 years later, I was watching this, and just, the hair was standing up on the back of my neck. It was that powerful. What are your guys' impressions of seeing that episode and those black and white episodes for the first time? Particularly you, Simon, because you're, written by David Whittaker, who have an in-depth knowledge of as well.
I think, you're right. I think she's brilliant. I think that the Wheel of Fortune and the Crusade generally is very well written, and not just her scenes. I think the scene with Barbara and Sophia, and Barbara being given the knife and stuff, is extraordinary thing to put out at 5:15 on a Saturday tea time for children to watch. The cast lean into the sort of Shakespearean bit, the kind of pastiche that it is. Shakespeare wrote plays called Richard II and Richard III, and this is Richard I. I think that's the gag of it. But also the style of the way it's made. The BBC were doing at the same time a TV adaptation of the history plays. David Warner was in them, and those history plays, basically the Royal Shakespeare Company had staged the history plays, but had adapted them to make them a bit more modern and fast moving. And the BBC in early '65 were doing TV versions of this, and I think the Crusade dovetails with that in terms of the tone and feel of those. So they knew that they were kind of taking their cues from this highbrow, slightly radical take on Shakespeare. And you can see she and Julian Glover are really going for it. Ably directed by Douglas Camfield, who is letting them go for it. Jean would talk about, she said this in interviews and stuff, that she and Douglas Camfield kind of clashed over her giggling on set, and on this thing about her and Julian leading into because basically she'd done her homework and she read up on Princess Johanna and her relationship with Richard, and this suggestion that there was something incestuous going on. And so that came from her methodical approach as an actress to doing the homework, and they put that in, and they went too far. I think, quite rightly, the director and the producer said you need to tone that down. But it's indicative of the kind of serious grafts she brought to what was basically a children's show, and rising to the material, that it warranted that kind of approach. So I think all of that is very revealing of her and of the material she was given. And then she was invited back, 4 or 5 months later, back to Doctor Who to play a completely different character, very much in the Avengers mould as it was at the time, wearing a catsuit and posing for pictures for the press in the way that Diana Rigg was doing at the time. And it's a completely different part, still with a rather peculiar relationship to her brother. I don't know why. It's the same in Battlefield. It's all about her brother in that as well, isn't it?
It is, and also slightly citrus. Let me jump in and just say a few things about the Crusade. So I first saw the Crusade when I was about 14. I was at Sydney Uni as part of a Doctor Who Club Day event, and the organisers were screening, and I'm not sure what they screened. They screened something beforehand, which I can't remember, and then all the organisers had walked out of the room as they want to do. And at the end of the episode, the video kept playing, and it went into the Crusade. So that was the first time I ever saw it. So I was about 14 years old, and I was blown away by it. It was just amazing television. And now as I go on looking at it in terms of the David Whittaker's writing is astounding. I think some of it's actually in iambic pentameter. So I don't know why, but the way they played is so strong. And really, you wouldn't know that the leads of the show aren't Julian and Jean, because they've just taken over that whole episode. And the Doctor and the Doctor in the beginning, in the total background,
off to the side.
They just seem like they seem like the minor guest characters. And it really feels like the show's become Julian and Jean's show for, what is it, about 10 minutes or so. And just the way they use the set, as you said, the direction is amazing because they're storming backwards and forwards through different rooms. I mean, they haven't got much set. It's only 2 rooms, but they use the entire 2 rooms backwards and forwards. The way she uses her dress and costume too, that becomes part of her power, and the way she swings it and moves it, and that becomes part of her fury, that she just knows how to use space. And Julian and her together are just astounding. And then when she turns on the Doctor with fury, it is terrifying. And so those scenes where she is just mesmerizing. And once again, William Hartnell next to an actress like Jean and even Julian, it lifts his performance. So you have this amazingly strong performance happening. As I say, I wish I'd find the rest of the Crusade, because the 2 episodes we now have are just amazing episodes. But that being said, Dalek Masterplan is probably my favorite 60s show, and we don't have much of that either. So, yeah, you're right. When they bring her back, so she must have been successful, because they had her back almost straight away. And I just keep thinking what an amazing companion she was. But Dalek Masterplan, are we ready for that?
Well, once again, that was episodes that I had seen a couple of, and when that second episode came back, I was thrilled. Not only did we have Sara Kingdom, we'd already seen her later on, but to get Brett Vine as well and get a full episode with him in it was great. Which turned out, we had a good foundation of a character for your stories in the future, Simon. We got to see him there too. So absolutely incredible stuff. The Dalek Masterplan. I think my first experience of that story was reading the Target novels. Written by, was it John Peel?
That's right,
that wrote those? It was in 2 parts. I can't remember. I remember one was called The Mutation of Time. I reckon that was probably part 2.
Yeah, and the first one's the Dalek Masterplan.
Is it? Yeah. So, and I was blown away by those Target novels as well. But the series itself was incredible piece of television, as is a lot of season 3, which unfortunately a lot of it doesn't exist, but it's one of the most experimental times in Doctor Who, even though we've got this massive sprawling Dalek episode. And some people say that Sarah's a companion, and some don't. I tend to think that she is, because of all the different locations that the Dalek Masterplan went to. So I see her as a fully fledged companion. But I think even in the extras, Jean said that she didn't see herself as one, because she was only in a few episodes. Mm-hmm. But I think she was strong enough to be a fully fledged companion. What are your thoughts, Philip, on that?
Yeah, I guess in some ways I talk about Adric being the first real companion they killed off in Doctor Who, because I think she wasn't there for that long. But she does companion Chronicles for Big Finish, so she must be a companion. And I think Big Finish does many stories for her now as she's on TV. I actually think it would have been a brave move and a strong move to have made her a proper companion. I think it's really a shame that the producers didn't think about having a character like her who could go on. Maybe she would be too violent. Maybe that would be a problem for them. Just she would be solving the problems too fast and wouldn't let the Doctor in. But the relationship she obviously had with William Hartnell, my first experience of the whole show was through the audio, and it's probably the story I've listened to the most, because I still go back and love listening to it, because it just sounds so good. The acting is so good in it. And my first experience was the Zorinza, the Doctor Who fan club of Australia. Actually, Tony Howe wrote from his notes, because he made thorough notes watching it, and his mother typed it all up into a booklet, and I've still got the book signed somewhere. Wow. And that's an amazing version of it with some pictures. So I remember reading through that several times. This is the audio. I think an amazing classic story. People complain about it being too long. It would have been hard to make, but it's truly a masterpiece. And I keep hoping and praying we might get some more episodes back, because there's more out there, I'm sure. Feast of Stephen, I'd love to see, but I don't think we'll ever get that back. But the rest of it, I'd love to still see, and I'm hoping that one day that'll all come back again.
I think the Feast of Stephen is one that we can categorically say we'll never see, because it didn't leave the shores of the UK. But
and they never made a film copy of it either.
Well, alternatively, it's the one that, if it comes back, holds most hope of us finding other things. So
true,
and bearing in mind, we've got the untransmitted pilot and loads of other things that they didn't make film copies of and stuff.
True.
I mean, who knows? Who knows? Maybe we've had it. Maybe what we've got is what is that. That's it. I don't know. But yes, it would be nice to see more of it.
What are your memories of the Daleks Masterplan?
So I must have seen. I think my introduction to it was the Daleks early years VHS tape with the 2 episodes 5 and 10 on it. I must have read. I think does Peter Haining's book 25 Glorious Years, I think, has a bit on Dalek Masterplan in that. So that was probably my introduction to it. And then I saw Day of Armageddon when it came back. And I think I borrowed the CDs of the soundtrack from my friend Robert Dick, which is probably why the character in Home Truths is called Robert. And listened to those and loved those. And then I got commissions to write a story for Sara Kingdom. So I listened to them again, kind of looking for what I could take from them. But the thing that really kind of stuck to me from watching it on the Daleks, the early years tape, was that scene where she reveals that Brett Vine was her brother. That seemed to be the character right there. So that's what I sort of gravitated towards. I think, I'd love to see the Feast of Stephen because I'd love to see them all do comedy. I mean, William Hartnell was known as a comic actor, and he's in loads of comedies. So the Feast of Stephen sounds very odd on a soundtrack, but that's because there's an awful lot of going on that we can't see. The suggestion is that it's not very good and it's a bit odd. But as we found when something like The Enemy of the World came back, that what sounded rather awkward and strange on audio is full of visual interest and is a much better story when you can see it. And I kind of hold out the hope that the Feast of Stephen might be similar. There's certainly, once you start digging into what was actually on screen and who's there, we know that Douglas Camfield involved at least some of his mates, and there's a journalist playing a cowboy in the background, which isn't really documented in anything else, but is in a newspaper report. So again, there's all sorts of things that are in that story that it would be nice to be able to fit together. And I'd love to see what Peter Purves is really good at comedy, and I would love to see what Jean did with that, and how she reacted to the kind of madcap nonsense of it, because it's so out of character for her as Sara Kingdom. So what was she doing to keep the character and yet play the comedy? I think that would be really interesting to see. And then later on and stuff, the later episodes and the final episode especially, I'd love to see. My uncle, who was watching Doctor Who as a kid at the time, could remember the death of Sara Kingdom. That kind of haunted him. I remember him telling me about her aging to death in detail. And she loved that. She talked to me about that and said, it was a slightly odd experience to see herself made up to look older, but the actual doing it and the practicalities of it she really enjoyed, and she kind of said, I love making up and making myself look different and scary and witchy. She had a great old time doing it. She does say, I don't know if I'm allowed to mention another podcast, but on the recent Power of Three podcast, they have a recording of an interview with Jean at a convention in 2003, where she says she was asked to stay on, and she didn't want to. And so there's the prospect of Sarah in the massacre, which I think would be, how would that have gone? Because she's not going to run off and, listen to the doctor.
No.
Can't help people. And also I note that Sarah is a 4-letter name, as is Anne and Dodo, the putative replacement. So, maybe that was in the offing. I've not seen any other indication that that was a serious thought. I think there's a memo from December 1965 where Gerald Savory, the head of serials, says he doesn't want. He objects to a suggestion that Stephen doesn't know what cricket is because he's from the future, and Savory basically says, "Look, he's got to be relatable, so don't do that kind of stuff that he doesn't know what ordinary things are." So maybe that is what stopped Sarah being a ongoing part of Doctor Who, and they wanted somebody who was more contemporary. But yeah, I'm very intrigued by the idea of Sarah staying on. I think that makes all of the stories that follow better.
It would have done.
For sure. And then, of course, a couple of decades later, we got both Nick Courtney and her back together again in Battlefield. And I knew nothing about the previous episodes when I first saw them back in 1989. So, yeah, if she liked getting made up, well, she certainly got made up again in that. So another powerful performance in Battlefield, Philip.
Yes, you can actually see she's progressed in some ways. Well, she's changed slightly as an actress because she plays in a very different way. And part of the thing she's possibly responding to Sylvester's Doctor as opposed to William's Doctor because she certainly plays off Sylvester slightly differently. But nevertheless, you've still got this strong female character. Was she a feminist, Simon?
Yeah, she was big into rights and roles and stuff. I'm not sure how she would describe herself, but I think Upstairs Downstairs is full of that kind of sensibility, and the House of Elliot as well is very on that kind of thing.
Both views of class and working class, and also women.
She was quite political.
So she
Yeah, she was
Yep.
definitely quite political. She had views on what was going on in the news at the time and that sort of thing. But I mean, my memory of Battlefield, I didn't really know her when I watched that when it was originally on. I was 13. I think I must have recognised her from Willow and Return to Oz and things of that sort. But I remember it being the fact that she was a star part being, among the sort of publicity, and that it was a notable thing that she was in Doctor Who. And it's quite a thing for her to come back to do, given her status at the time, because she was quite a big figure. But it was it was a different kind of role, and you're right. It's quite a stagey performance, I think. There's something a bit what's the word? A bit arch, I think, in the way that she plays that.
Yep.
And I wonder how much that comes from the director, because all of these things are tempered by, the kind of tone of a story is very much tempered by the director. But yeah, you're right. She's responding to Sylvester McCoy. She's responding to the younger actors around her as well, but it's kind of, there's also the thing that for the first two episodes she's on her own as well, so that, but they would have all been in a rehearsal room together, so they'd all have had a sense of how this played out and things. But yeah, I think the thing that didn't really strike me when I was 13, but now as an older man I kind of notice, is she's very glamorous in it. And there's a sort of confidence about her in that role that is quite striking. It's not like her other witchy roles. It's a much more and quite a rare. It's a good part for a middle-aged woman, which was, it is still relatively rare on television. So, and she really goes for it. And she's great fun as well. And whether she's doing spells or that that sense at the end of her loss, the loss of her brother, and that's what motivates her and stuff. And actually, this is all about grief. I find quite moving. Yeah, she's great.
Yeah, just when you think that's all over, you've got that extra bit at the end, which just hits the home run.
Yeah, and I love Ben Aronovich's writing. I know he's not quite so keen on Battlefield, but I love it.
And it takes Morgaine. I mean, Jean takes the character through a big emotional journey in terms of being able to be generous, being kind, the relationship with her son, which is a bit creepy at times, but also once again loving, but also spiteful and rejection of him. And she really does go through a big emotional journey, which very few actors could actually, I suspect, manage in 4 episodes and be believable.
Yeah, I think it's a big role, isn't it? And it's a sort of star part, and she brings her A game to it. So it's it's good.
Well, speaking of Battlefield, we had the opportunity to get some comments from 2 of her co-stars from that story. We had Sophie Aldred and Sylvester McCoy both contributed some material for our podcast today. So let's cross to that now.
So, Sophie, tell us your memories of Jean. When did you first meet her?
Well, I suppose I must have met her in the rehearsal rooms in North Acton in London when we were preparing for Battlefield. And I don't remember the moment, but I do remember being very, very excited and thrilled that she was going to be in it, because I had loved Upstairs, Downstairs. And of course, she was I didn't realise until I met her that she had such a huge part in it, as well as being in it, So I loved her character in Upstairs, Downstairs, and I was very quick to tell her that, and she was very pleased, obviously, and then told me that she'd, obviously it was her show, really. And that was amazing, because at the time, I think we've sort of almost forgotten in this day and age just how difficult it was for women to get on in the business. It was very much run by men. It was a very male preserve. So, I mean, she was a very strong, determined woman, that's for sure. And but also very, very lovely and funny as well. And then actually, while we were doing Battlefield, I was still relatively new to TV acting. I'd done the previous season, I'd done Dragonfire, and that was obviously my first initiation into TV acting. But what I realised was that what was going to work for me was to watch like a hawk all these incredible actors who I'd grown up watching, and Jean was no exception. So I would watch her as she rehearsed. I'd watch her as she developed the character of Morgaine, and I'd watch the way she was in front of the camera, and I would learn from her, and also who she was as a person. Did not suffer fools gladly, no nonsense, just and also slightly. I seem to remember her being, 'cause she'd been in Doctor Who before, of course, and knew well what it was, but how kind of wonderfully ridiculous the world of Doctor Who is, and playing this, the Morgaine for her in her body armor and everything, that sort of Amazonian. She found it all quite funny as well.
I found in extras and interviews that I've seen of Jean that she was very quick-witted, and she had a very dry sense of humour. Is that your impression of her as well?
Absolutely, yeah, very dry. And sometimes you were kind of, what kind of a mood is she in, because you didn't quite know whether that kind of that was she was going to find that funny or not, or I'm not explaining very well, but she was slightly scary as well, because she was such a strong woman, and she knew her own mind so well. Very bright, very clever person. But she was brilliant. I mean, just so great to learn from.
Usually the biggest confrontation with a villain, the super villain, is with the Doctor. But you had one of the most powerful and memorable scenes with her in that pub scene. What was it like actually rehearsing and playing that scene with such a great actress?
Well, it was funny because the relationship between her at that point and Ace and me was very much. It felt like we were playing out, this older, established, great actress who knew exactly what she was doing. We enjoyed it too. I mean, it was. We had a laugh as well. It's funny because you just see the final product, but of course, it is faintly ridiculous as well what we're up to all the time in Doctor Who. But I do remember I loved doing that scene, because I think when you're working with somebody really good and established and who absolutely knows what they're doing, it definitely ups your own game. And I knew that this was it, I don't know, it was yeah, I had to match what she was doing as well, which was a gift. It's a gift to an actor to play with a well-established actor like that.
Did you ever meet her again or see her again after Doctor Who? Or was that your one time with her?
Yeah, I did bump into her at conventions, and she was always lovely, charming, very. What was lovely about her was that she was very. She approved of what I was doing as well. I think she knew that she could see this sort of this young, strong character role. She very much liked the idea of this tough companion. She used to say, well, it was very different in my day, and she could recognize that that it was a different way that the companion was going.
I just thought that was very interesting that you said about tough roles, because she was in Doctor Who 3 times, as you probably know, and back in the 60s, both of her roles, even though she was playing a princess in one and a security agent, they were both very tough roles, and she just carried them off just beautifully.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's it. We do forget that there were those strong parts in those days and for those times. And I think she saw that in the role of Ace as well, and sort of approved.
It's a shame actually the producers didn't see that this could have actually been a really powerful companion to keep going. Like that, she replaced a child female companion who screamed a lot, and then another child companion who screamed a lot came after her. But for 9 episodes we had this woman very clearly in the style of the Avengers who could look after herself. It would have been an interesting thing to keep her going.
Yes, exactly. And I wonder why that was. It's funny. I wonder whether they just thought that she didn't appeal to the dads enough, that old chestnut that luckily we don't have anymore. Yeah, it's odd, isn't it? Maybe she didn't want to carry on. I don't know. Do you know that?
Yeah,
because she knew her own mind. She absolutely knew what she wanted to do and what she didn't want to do. Remember that very clearly.
So, Sylvester, how did you first meet Jean Marsh?
Well, I first met Jean Marsh way back in the 60s. I was a friend of Miriam Makeba, world famous South African singer who used to sing with clicks. And I knew her cousin. And her cousin was singing with a band in a bookshop in Islington way back then. And I was outside handing out flyers to encourage people to go into the bookshop and listen to my friend. Anyway, this young American girl came up to me and said, "Oh, hello there. What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm handing out these flowers for my friend. It's really nice singing. You should go and listen." She said, "Oh, yeah, yeah." And I said, "What are you doing?" She said, "Oh, I'm here on a holiday." I said, "Oh, yes. So where have you been?" She said, "Oh, I've been to Stratford upon Avon." And I said, "Oh, wow, yeah, Stratford. That's the birthplace of William Shakespeare." She said, "Who?" And I said, "Shakespeare, William Shakespeare." She said, "Who?" I said, "He wrote Hamlet and various other plays." Oh, and then a light bulb went on her head. She said, "Oh, you mean Shakespeare?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "Oh, yeah, Shakespeare, Anne Hathaway's boyfriend." Well, that was any early feminism as far as I could see. But at the same time, Jean Marsh happened to be walking past. And as I just mentioned Shakespeare, and Jean Marsh was at the time in the West End in the Shakespeare play, I think it might be As You Like It, and was getting, rave reviews. So I just happened to say to this young girl, "Oh, by coincidence, just there coming up here is Jean Marsh. She's a Shakespearean actress." And she went, "Oh my God." And she ran up to her and went, "Oh my God." And I don't know what she said, but I mean, the poor Jean Marsh was kind of up against the wall. This, she was, that she knew Anne Hathaway's boyfriend. So that was the first time ever.
Did you actually talk to Jean then? You just recognised her?
No. I then, as she left, she managed to pull herself away. I went and apologised to her, and that was it, really. So, cut to years later. Suddenly, I'm Doctor Who, and she is cast as the villain in
Battlefield.
Curse of Fenric. Is it
Battlefield.
Curse of Fenric?
Battlefield.
Was it
Morgaine.
Battlefield? That was the one. Yeah, she was in Battlefield, and so I was delighted to be able to apologise to her and remind her of that little story of many years before. She was lovely, Jean. She was really just one of the gang, really, this great actress. And she was gentle, she was kind, but yeah, and when she played the villainess, she was terrifying. It was proves her how good an actress she was. And it was a joy to work with her. And after we'd made the story and filmed it, I bumped into her maybe one or two times, sociably, and it was always a delight to see her. And she always seemed quite pleased to see me too. And I think, I'd like to think of her as a dear friend. And it's sad now, but she did live a long life and a good one.
An amazing
And it was
career.
the world was and the world was a better place for her in it.
Hello? I'm sorry to intrude on you. Is anybody there? Hello?
Oh, I could tell you 100 stories. You don't run a guest house without picking up a few tales.
I think you know the story I want to hear.
Do I know?
It's about a house. A house of dreams and magic.
The doctor, with his long silver hair and old-fashioned clothes. He seemed so ancient, so travelled, so deeply marked by time.
The house is always listening.
Is anyone there? Doctor, can you hear that?
I don't believe in ghosts.
All right, let's talk about Home Truths, which is the first of the companion chronicles that you did, Simon, in that trilogy for Sara Kingdom. How did all that come about?
Well, it's amazing.
There will be spoilers. Just
Yes,
so
there will
people are
be-
aware, there are going to be spoilers. So,
Yeah,
so listen.
let's do spoilers. Yeah,
Yes, there will
Yeah,
be spoilers.
so listen. Make sure if you haven't listened, listen first.
Yeah, go and buy it now. If you've already got it, go and buy another one. That would be good. Yeah, it's funny listening to Sophie talk about Jean Marsh because I wrote for a companion chronicle for Sophie and I wrote a companion chronicle for Jean Marsh at the same time by mistake. So in
how so?
well,
What mistake was that?
I met David Richardson for the first time, who just joined Big Finish as producer, and there was a group of us who met up to discuss what became the Key to Time series for Big Finish. And I was chatting to David, and he said, I'm also taking over the Companion Chronicles, and if you'd like to pitch for it, I will read your pitch, but no guarantees, and the usual kind of thing. And he said, Companion Chronicles have been running a while. We've got this kind of format now that seems to work, where there are each one tells two stories at once. One is a story about the companion in their days with the Doctor, and cutting against that is where they are now. And your second voice, your second actor, may be in the story with the Doctor, they may be in the story where they are now, but that's how it works. And the juxtaposition of that, and that kind of thing, and what they felt at the time and what they feel now looking back, that gives it a bit of emotional sort of crunch. That was the idea. And he said, kind of offhand, and that format would work for pretty much all the companions, apart from obviously somebody like Jean Marsh, which is a shame because she's just done a Big Finish and she'd like to do more. And I said, kind of off the cuff, not really, no, just being contrary and annoying, yeah, you could do a Jean Marsh, you could do a Sara Kingdom story, as long as the story explains how she can be telling it. And that was it, not even pitching it, just being annoying. And David said, yes, I'd like that. That sounds great. Send me that pitch. So I then was like, right, if you're going to do that story, it's got to be a ghost story because she's dead. So it's got to be some kind of ghost story. It's resurrecting her somehow, so there has to be a special circumstance for it. So I thought I will do some kind of Christmassy ghost story, a bit Christmas Carol, a bit that was kind of my beginnings of my idea. And and she'd make a wish or something like that. And that kind of idea that was there. I think I sent a paragraph idea, maybe a page, not fully fleshed out, but just to see what David thought. He liked that idea, passed it to Alan Barnes, who was, I think, doing approvals at Big Finish, maybe script editing, I can't remember. And Alan said, yeah, this is quite fun, but the problem with setting a story at Christmas is that The Chimes of Midnight by Robert Sherman is really good, and you will only be judged in comparison to that. So what about, he said, rather than doing the sort of Victoriana and kind of feel of it, why don't you push the more sci-fi bits of this and set it in a kind of futuristic setting, which would be a bit more in keeping with the Dalek Masterplan anyway. And that was brilliant because that kind of gave the shape to it. And then the other thing was that Jean had been in a play with Mark Gatiss, and I think that may have helped get her into Big Finish in the first place. I think he might have put in a good word. So one of the early suggestions was that Mark might be my second voice. So I didn't know him at the time. I do know him now, but I was kind of thinking, what can I give him to do? And in the Christmas Carol version, he was going to be a vicar. I kind of had the Reverend Matthews from Ghostlight in mind. Basically, what I had was Mark with big whiskers in studio. That was kind of the idea. When it moved into the sci-fi version, the futuristic version, I was then like, right, well, I'll reverse that, and he'll play the same kind of role, but he'll be a skeptic. He'll be an atheist who doesn't believe in ghosts and yet is confronted by one. And that's kind of how it went. And then I kind of realized, oh, she's a ghost, but so we don't realize because we can't see, because we could only listen, that Robert can't see her because she's a spirit in the house. We think she's in the room. So that will be one of the revelations in the story. And then I think my earliest idea was that this is going to be about a wish, but it's a kind of careful what you wish for. It's a wish that has unintended consequences. And between all of those things, the story kind of coalesced. And because originally I'd had the kind of ghost story for Christmas, signalman type feel of a Christmas story, that kind of carried into the sci-fi setting. And so I pitched that, and Big Finish were happy, and they sent it to the estate of Terry Nation, who owned the rights to Sara Kingdom, and they didn't know what Sara Kingdom was. And at the time, this was 2008, the estate of Terry Nation was making quite a lot of money out of Dalek merchandise and Dalek stuff, and we were offering them, a fee, but probably not the most enormous fee. So this wasn't really a priority for them, and they didn't really know what it was, and were a bit wary about signing away rights to something that they didn't really understand. So they kind of said, "Look, let us look into this," and nothing happened, and nothing happened. So it didn't look like it was ever going to happen. And David Richardson, bless him, said, "Well, I should, engage you in something else." So he commissioned a companion chronicle for Sophie that would tie into the Key to Time. So I went and wrote that, and literally had just had the green light to do it. And they came back and said, Home Truths is greenlit as well, and also Jean is available on these dates, so we need the script turned around very quickly. So
Yeah.
I ended up
So all of a sudden,
so
got two going
as
at
is the
once.
way, I had to write both fairly quickly. And so I think my memory is that Home Truths was commissioned in sort of June or July, and it was in studio in September. So it was a fairly swift turnaround. But there was a lot of back and forth on it. There was a lot of notes, a lot of had we got the tone about it right? Had we got the level of violence right? Originally, my original draft, the people in the house, there's a couple who die in the house. They had children who also died. And that came out because that was going too far.
Can't kill children.
Well, yeah, I think I could have.
Cats is okay though.
No, cats aren't good either.
No, cats. My daughter has very strong views about that. She was not happy about that on Saturday. Yeah, I think the issue with the children in Home Truths was not that the children died, but it was the mother who killed them by, using a rag, which
is the wrong thing.
Which is what she thinks the wrong thing, and in a moment, wishes they weren't there. And that was too bleak. Basically, it was just pushing over the edge of the tone, and that the issue is that we haven't recorded anything, so you're kind of second guessing what it's going to sound like and feel like before you get in the studio. But yeah, so it was quite a arduous bit of work, but then we knew it was Jean, and I was very keen. I think everybody was very keen that we presented her with something that was, at the right level for her caliber as an actress.
The thing I love, as I say, the thing I love about audio stories is when they can only work for audio. And I mean, Big Finish tells wonderful stories, and lots of them I think would make wonderful TV shows, better than what we're getting often. So, but when you Home Truths could only work in the audio medium because the reveal had to be the surprise, because it could only happen, and the way that you reveal it is just a stunning moment. And so when I first listened to it years ago, that's the whole concept of what you did at the end in terms of that she was the house herself was just breathtaking. And then when she's looking at herself from all directions, and that picture it stayed with me for years, and I never forgot that. So all sorts of memories, and I listened to so many Big Finish audios, but that memory of that scene has stuck with me since the very first time I listened to it. I listened again this week. It was just this beautiful reveal. And of course, you're listening now. Of course, I know what's going on because I know the end. But it's such a beautiful reveal that's just so cleverly written and could only work for audio.
Bless you. Well, that's very kind. Those are the things that I worry about as I'm writing them. There is a lot of Doctor Who stuff. There's a lot of Doctor Who audios. There's a lot of books and stuff. So how do you make what you're writing linger in the mind of the audience? but yes, yeah, and also how do you use the medium to maximum effect? I think I was very conscious as I was writing it that I only had two actors, so I didn't. I was worried that it would sound like, you know how if you listen to something like the Pescatons, you can hear that it's actors stepping forward to a single microphone, and they step back in that kind of performance. It's not immersive in the way that a lot of Big Finish stuff is. And I was very concerned, how do I make two actors stood in adjacent booths sound like a world? So those kind of things were very important. I think Davey Darlington, the sound engineer on some of my previous Big Finish stuff, gave me a good note, which he said, if you can have a recognizable sound effect in an environment, when you cut back to that environment, because of that sound, people will know where they are, and you don't have to spell it out. So I put a ticking clock into the room where where Sarah, older Sarah, is telling the story, and what that means is that you can have a kind of cliffhanger in the story she's telling, and then we cut back to the room, and you're kind of you kind of have a sense of where it is. So actually, what the listener does is visualize it, and that was a really really helpful steer. I can't remember. I think Davey gave me that note on something else, and I remembered it for this. I don't think I can't remember, but yes. So all of that kind of stuff.
And I think because Lisa Bowerman, as a director, loves pauses too, she often leaves chunks of space between scenes. And so one of the things that's really effective here is you've got a really powerful scene happening. It's cuts off, and then there's just nothing, and then it's slowly the clock comes in. And so, yes, you just know, and for 2 or 3 seconds, it's just you're back in the room, but no one's saying anything. But you know where you are without words, and that's part of, as I said,
Lisa
just loves that pause.
Lisa's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. It is a joy working with Lisa, and I've worked with her a lot. Yes, absolutely, she got that. The sound engineers Lauren and Richard were also fantastic on this, really, really good, and they got all of that sensibility. It's sometimes you can find that what you have in your head isn't what the director or other people involved, they see it in a different way. I think on Home Truths we were all on the same page about what this was. I did talk to Lisa about it quite a bit in advance of recording, but I think we both knew it's we want the feel of Ghost Stories of Christmas. We want that kind of suspenseful, uncanny feeling to it, and she just went with it. And I was a member of a team, and everybody on that team was brilliant. I couldn't be happier. And because I wasn't at the recording, I had no kind of say over any of those things. I suspect.
Okay, so when did you first hear it and know it worked?
So I was sent a copy of it. So because it was coming out in November, it was turned around pretty quickly. So it was recorded in September, and I must have heard it in October, and was just overjoyed, absolutely overjoyed with it. Because I knew I wasn't going to be there, I knew I had to be kind of hands off and let them get on with it. I suspect if I had been there, I'd have just been in the way, because they all knew what they were doing. But it was just great. And the thing is, you never know with these things what people are going to make of it. You never know whether these people are going to, I like it, but does anybody else or whatever? It's the same with the TV show. I was on set for Space Babies in 2023 and I thought the script was really funny, and I thought on set seeing what they were doing was amazing, and I was a bit surprised that some of the reaction to it when it went out was people going meh. And it's like, well, what more do you want? It's really ambitious and nuts and exciting and fast moving and has like 5 different stories all happening at once. And so the response took me a bit by surprise. And Home Truths could have been the same. People could have kind of gone, "Oh, well, I've heard all of this before. It's just the ghost stories for Christmas with in a IKEA of the future." But luckily, that wasn't what happened, and people went for it.
And in good Heartless Star, you've got titles for both episodes. So that part one is Dream Home, part two is Home Truth.
Yeah, so I think Dream Home was a working title of the thing originally, and we worried that having Dream in the title would suggest none of it was real, and so it would be kind of dismissible. I think there was conversation online on somewhere, probably like, what was it, Outpost Gallifrey or something, about did these episodes with the First Doctor have individual titles. So I can't remember. I think I was asked by Big Finish whether I had views on that, and then that became a kind of motif of the ones I wrote. But yeah, it was trying to make it. All of these things are about how do you make it feel authentic to the period, while doing something new, so it's not just kind of derivative.
How is that though? Because whenever I saw your name, not only in the Companion Chronicles from this era, but also the Early Adventures, which is one of my favourite ranges ever from Big Finish, you seem to be the go-to guy for that era. What is it that you connect with in the black and white era?
Well, it's not my choice. That was, you'd have to ask David Richardson why he thought I was the fit for that. We did, so because I wrote a story for the First Doctor and a story for the Seventh Doctor at the same time, and then they asked me to do more First Doctors but not more Seventh Doctors. I don't know. That's not my. That was not within my gift. But once we had done the Sarah trilogy, David had an idea to do a trilogy for Peter Purvis, and Peter had just done The Suffering written by Jack Rayner, and they wanted to try something else. And David had this idea for a new companion for the First Doctor, and I just took my cue from that. Really, he commissioned me on that basis, and I did what I'd done with Sara Kingdom, which is I watched and re-listened to the episodes and tried to find something to hang the character on, and to reveal about him, something that we hadn't heard. And then, bless him, Peter was at a convention. I think he was at Gallifrey in LA, and said he'd love to do more with me. And whoever was at Big Finish heard that, and I was duly commissioned, at royal command, literally, because he's King Stephen, which was a delight. So I did 2 trilogies for him, which,
And the Doctor as well.
Yeah,
at the time.
Yeah. And then there were 2 with him and Jean, and we would have done more if she hadn't had a stroke and been unable to do it, which was a great shame. I'd still be doing them if I could. I loved what a joy it all was. But yeah, I do like that period, but then I like all the periods of Doctor Who. And when we got into the early adventures, I was doing a lot of Troughton Doctor stuff, and just moved on to that. And again, watched the episodes and made notes and tried to think about what's it like, what's going on in their heads as all of this is happening. What does Ben really want out of life? What does Polly really want out of life? The kind of questions that actors tend to ask about characters, like, where do you see this character in 5 years' time? What do they want to be doing? If they were to write themselves a letter, what would they say? All of those kind of things that spark bits of story and things. And I'm also very mindful. The other thing I'm very mindful of is that if you travel in space and time, it's a life altering. It's going to alter your perspective forever. A bit like you get with former astronauts, where some of them struggle with real life after they've been in space, because everything's out of perspective, everything's a bit askew. So those are the sorts of things that I'm conscious of. But I'm. You say that I have a particular affinity for the First Doctor. I'd like to think so, but the fact that I wrote Loatherism, that's not me. That's what I was told to do.
You mentioned you stopped working with Jean because of her stroke. The last story to come out, though, she did with Sontarans in 2016, which is 5 years after the stroke. Are you saying that it wasn't actually the stroke, it was her deterioration over this couple of years, or had she recorded everything before the stroke?
So my memory is that she had the stroke in 2012, I think, in the summer of 2012. Is that right? I may have got my dates.
I thought it was 2011, but you might be right.
Yeah.
I thought it was 2011.
And I was supposed to so we recorded something, and she was on good form, and then about 2 weeks after that, she was at the BFI in London with for a screening of Frenzy, the Hitchcock film she's in, which she's brilliant in, really, really funny part. And she and Clive Swift were on stage. You can see that on YouTube. They're interviewed by Matthew Sweet, and it's great. And you get a real sense of what she was like in person. She's very funny and stuff. Though I can see, because I spent time with her, that she's kind of, it's an act, it's a performance of being media celebrity, which she didn't really enjoy doing. She didn't like doing interviews and stuff. But I was supposed to interview her for Doctor Who magazine, and I talked to her about this at the recording of whatever we'd done a few weeks before. And because she knew me and because she kind of trusted me, she was happy to do an interview where the idea was that we'd probe a bit further than her Doctor Who parts and stuff. And then her agent rang me and said, this has happened, and can we just put it off for a while? And we're going to need to see what she can do. And she was in the second series of Upstairs Downstairs, the redone version of that, but in a very minimal way. And it became clear that she wasn't there. My memory is that we had recorded stuff before then, and it just took a while to come out. But I may have got that wrong. Maybe she made a recovery and came in again. But my memory was that she wasn't really up to it. And these things are always difficult because you're never quite sure. Do we just leave it for a few weeks? Do we leave it for a bit? And on the Sontarans, I visited, but I don't think I was there on studio. So all of those things would have been dealt with by Ken Bentley, the director, anyway. And then you kind of have this sort of awful dawning realization that she's not really coming back, and that's it. That you've had your run. So my time with her was 2008 to 2012. And I did 5 stories with her, and to be honest, if I'd just done Home Truths, that would be a career highlight. But to do a whole bunch, was a treat.
Coming soon from Big Finish Productions. Doctor Who: The Companion Chronicles, The Drowned World.
Robert, you look hungry. Can I get you something?
Not for myself, Miss Kingdom.
I told you, call me Sarah. And it's no trouble at all. You need to eat.
I haven't changed my mind about you, Sarah. It's not a bacterium. It's not a virus. We don't know how it spreads. We hardly know anything. Some are saying it's witchcraft.
But you're a rationalist.
I was. But then my daughter got ill.
I was still travelling with the Doctor and Stephen, buffeting through space and time. We'd escaped the Dalek plot and so much death in my own time, and seen Christmas and Liverpool and Mars. I was beginning to enjoy my time in the TARDIS.
I must remind you, gentlemen, that the woman you're about to hear was not visible in the room. She spoke from the very air. A voice from 1,000 years ago, yet I dare any one of you to tell me that she's not just as alive as we are. I haven't changed my mind about you, Sarah. Being here, calling you back by retelling your story, I've broken the law.
You said there weren't any laws anymore.
It doesn't matter. I swore an oath.
So you came here, summoned me out of the air, thinking I'd grant you your wish. What then? You'll wish me away again. But you're still the only person to visit me in a very long time.
I was listening to The Drowned World this morning, and when I was visualizing that in my head, I was seeing it in vivid black and white. It was fantastic. Is that your intention, is to try and... when you're writing it, are you seeing it in black and white as well? Or is that just me? Water is...
I was being mocked by David Richardson because I would write in the script whether a scene was on location or in studio. That's the level of tedious, anything to prevaricate and not actually write the scripts, but just worry about the kind of details of it. I'd be thinking about, have I described colour? Is there stuff that's colour? It should be tonal rather than colour, so that you can imagine it in black and white. I think I actually had notes saying you need to put some colour into this. But yes, all of those kind of things. How long the scenes are, does that match what's on TV? Does the staging of it work? Because what you kind of want is for not just for people to be able to imagine it happening, but imagine they're seeing it on TV in that feel. So when she does, it's not a spacewalk, but effectively it's a spacewalk in the Drowned World. I was thinking, how would Douglas Camfield have staged that at Ealing? What bits of this would have been at the film studios in Ealing? What bits of this would have been done at Riverside Studios or Lime Grove? Those kind of mechanics of it. And when we did, and that means things like you can't have too many sets because they would have to all fit into Lime Grove. So you kind of keep it localized and that sort of stuff. Those are the kind of stupid things going through my head when I'm writing these things. That kind of sensibility hopefully gives a kind of a kind of texture or tone that listeners will pick up on.
Well, it certainly did me. Philip, what were your thoughts on that story, The Drowned World?
Well, it was interesting because with Home Truths, it all takes place inside the same house. And although you've got two stories happening, it's two stories in different time zones, but the same location. So it was interesting suddenly moving to, you've still got the whole house location happening, and then you've got the Drowned World story happening. And they're very two such distinct stories that you could almost listen to just one or the other. You don't need to listen to them both. They do intersect, but it really is, you get caught up in one world and suddenly you've put back to the other one again. And for me, actually, I must admit, the world in which the house is set was, to me, what was most curious. Trying to understand the work of the world outside, the elders, the technology they're using, the wax cylinders, why is it recording here, not there? What has happened to the world? And then the sickness that came, which ended up being quite typical with COVID later on. It was almost predictive of what was going to come or could come in our world. So to me, actually, I always wanted to keep getting back to the house story because for me, it was what was going on with those two characters there. So the Drowned World story was good, and that was where the action and excitement was. But for me, I really wanted to concentrate more. And in fact, I would love a whole story just set in that world, understanding the world that works, because it was fascinating. It was the world building happening through two people and little conversations was just very powerful to me.
So that involves kind of dropping in references to things that you don't explain, so that the listener is kind of building that up and kind of clues and stuff. So the wax cylinder was because it's got to be an audio recording. That was kind of the thing. But also kind of to have that idea that society has collapsed and that they were going back to old technology. And I kind of thought people would get that, and the idea of the boat across the water and things. But also, I was trying to look for things that would sound interesting on audio. So the water and stuff is quite evocative, but that would make it sound big as well. And and I had 2 actors in a studio, so anything I could do to conjure something a bit rich and vivid, and then the temptation is to dig into that and find out more about it. When we did the Cold Equations with Peter Purvis and Oliver Harper, played by Tom Allen, my original pitch was that would be set in the same world, and that they would when the planet that this is all happening above is the same setting as that. I think I referred to it as Space Ely in my emails at the time, and so we'd find out a bit more about what had happened and what had happened to that world. And David, I think quite rightly, said, no, do something new rather than try and join it up. And that going back and revisiting it actually makes it smaller, if that makes sense. Which, I think he was, in retrospect, I think he was absolutely right about. And I tried to, and we also had the same thing when there was a suggestion of doing a 4th Sara Kingdom story, and I pitched it. I pitched an idea, and it would have been her and the 5th Doctor. So at the end of Guardians of the Solar System, it's the 5th Doctor who picks her up, and he is surprised to be there and to see her, but also he has only recently lost Adric, so they are both grieving and coming to terms with things.
Oh, wow.
While faced with some mad adventure in space that neither of them really wants to deal with, because they've both got their own going on. That was the idea. And in discussing...
But the 5th Doctor's also a bit pretty, so Jean would have loved that too.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, and and she and Peter together would have been fantastic.
Yes, it would have been amazing.
And I finally managed to get something of what I had in mind there into when I did Wicked Sisters. In that case, it was Peter Davison and Louise Jameson, but a similar kind of dynamic going on there. But yes, again, in conversation with David Richardson, we just both felt the trilogy of Sara Kingdom had worked really well, and that doing more wasn't going to make it better. The risk was that you do the Duff one, and that I think the feeling was that it was time to let somebody else have a go as well. And Eddie Robson did the 5 Companions, which is great and very different to what I was doing, which was exactly the right take on it and really fun. And Gene's fantastic in that, absolutely fantastic in that, and not least because it's very well written. Damn him! But I enjoyed that a great deal. I was stupidly jealous that somebody else was writing for her, and yet delighted by what they did. So.
Coming soon from Big Finish Productions, Doctor Who: The Companion Chronicles, the Guardian of the Solar System.
There's a house across the water in Ely. A house that grants your wishes before you even know what you've wished for. I can't sit with you forever. We all have our time. Mine has long since passed.
Mavik Chen was guardian of the solar system, the most powerful human being who ever lived. The huge cogs turning click by click in perfect unhurried time. The peculiar long twists of metal on the top of the pendulums, the flaps and panels and unlikely shapes, honed by engineers over centuries. I was trapped. I've always been trapped. Just a cog in the machine.
We're all trapped, Sarah. You trapped me with you.
I grant your final wish? Yes, Robert, I will.
Guardians of the Solar System, is that where you envisaged it going right from the beginning? Or did that sort of organically happen, where you would go back and meet Mavic Chen?
No. So the Guardians of the clock element of that story was something I pitched for the second story, and I had that idea. I'd had that idea for a Big Finish for some time, and the way that being caught up in the clock, but the clock is affecting time. That was kind of the idea, and I pitched that to David for the second one, and he went, and it was like one of 3 or 4 ideas I sent, and he liked the Drowned World, but I made sure to mention it in the Drowned World, and I think it gets a reference in Home Truths as well. I can't remember now, but just as these are the adventures I've had, and that was partly just to suggest that there had been more adventures and to say something suggestive, a bit like when Obi-Wan Kenobi mentions the Clone Wars in Star Wars, and you go, "Oh, what was that? That was intriguing." So that's kind of what it was. But by the time I was doing the Drowned World, I was thinking, where do we go with this? So I kind of put in a bit more detail that I could pick up on later. And when I went to the Big Finish production office which was at that point in Sydenham in Lower London, South London, to kind of chat through the idea with David, he wasn't, a bit to my surprise, he wasn't that keen on it. He wasn't saying no, but it didn't seem to excite him a great deal. And he said, what about if we met Mavic Chen again, but before the events of the Dalek Masterplan, and now she knows what he's like, and can she change things and can she not change things? And I was kind of like, oh, I don't, do I really want to do what's a kind of fan service type story? And David said, it's the third part of a trilogy, but we need a boost to get people to buy this, so that it's a bit of an added incentive. But also, you could graft this onto the clock story. And I was like, oh, now you're talking. Now I can see how this would work. So it's not a derivative story, it's a new story, but it uses these elements. And that all came together fairly straightforwardly from that point. When we got into studio, because we needed Jean to play, to narrate bits of Mavic Chen, and because Niall was going to have to do bits of the Doctor in narrating things, the first thing we did when we got into studio was we watched Day of Armageddon. And we had a cup of tea and watched it and had a good old giggle about the way Mavic Chen holds a pencil and all of that stuff. And I think that might have been the first episode of Doctor Who that Niall had ever seen.
Isn't it like that or something?
That's exactly that, yeah.
How...
Which I think is taken from looking at the way Chinese calligraphy can be done. It's a sort of style. I think that's what he's doing.
Okay.
But yeah, it's idiosyncratic. So we watched that, which I think was no help at all to Niall McGregor on explaining what Doctor Who is and things. He was just as baffled by the end of it. But he said, who was that actor playing Mavic Chen? And, we said, oh, it's a guy called Kevin Stoney. And Jean Marsh went, Kevin Stoney? I think I might have worked with Kevin Stoney. So we all kind of paused. And Lisa, who, was the adult in the room, said, Jean, we've just watched you working with Kevin Stoney. And she said, oh, right, yes. She said, the trouble is, because I hadn't got my glasses on when I'm working in studio, I don't know who anybody is or what people look like. So I kind of work with people and then I hear their names and I don't always join them up. I was like, oh, okay. So she says, yes, he's very good. She said, but it's funny. I know Kevin Stoney by reputation as a name, and I know that actor that I worked with as being very good, but I hadn't joined up that they were the same person. And yeah, which tickled me anyway.
Yeah, I noticed when she played that character on the audio, she put a slight Chinese accent in there, just very slight. Did you notice that?
Yeah, so we had a chat about what he was doing, because the idea is, which was quite a thing in the mid '60s. It's what's happening with Dr. No in the James Bond film and in the book, which is the idea that that you've got a character who is a mix of different cultures, of different ethnicities, and we talked about that and what his makeup's doing, because she was going, that's a very odd makeup that he's got, because it's not the usual way you would black up or yellow up a Caucasian actor. It's suggesting a kind of amalgamation of things going on there, and yeah, and the calligraphy and what he's wearing and things like that. I think Jean was quite on that as being very much of its period, and she was kind of going, she'd been in The Saint, and she'd been in. Is she in the Avengers? Maybe not, but she's in various adventure things like that. And she was kind of going, this is the kind of.
She was in Danger Man, wasn't she?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and so she was kind of like these are the kind of what at the time would have been seen as a kind of exoticism, and now sits in a just a less comfortable place. But she was kind of on that and wanted it to be part of the thing, and she picked up on his name as well. So yeah, I think that was what was going on there, and it's at the time we talked that through. I would be surprised if we went that way now. I think our kind of the sensitivities about those things that we're much more aware of. I'm not sure we were on it that day.
There's one thing I want to pick up on, and that's the sound design of the clockwork itself with the men working on the clock. And there was one particular movie that I could have sworn you were being inspired by. So I was keen to get to the extras at the end. And as you started to say, oh yes, I was inspired by, but you didn't say what I thought it was. And my thought was, it reminded me so much of Metropolis.
Yeah.
So in the factory with that clock scene, and I thought you must have been inspired by that, but it was something completely different you're inspired by for that.
Yeah, so my big influence was the Hudsucker Proxy, the Coen Brothers film from 1990, which I absolutely adore. I tend to watch it on New Year's Day most years, and it's not just that I took that idea and sort of did a Doctor Who version of it. I've been kind of thinking of other versions, but Metropolis. There's the Charlie Chaplin film where he gets caught up in the workings of a machine. Oh, what's that called? Can't remember. And there's also I was also thinking of, there's the Robert Powell version of the 39 Steps where he ends up hanging from the clock face of Big Ben, and I kind of had all of those things in mind, but what I was really what I wanted to have was a kind of physical. The problem with when you're doing something like when I wrote something like The Time Travelers, my novel, it's very conceptual about how time works, and what I was trying to think of was a way that you could make that more tangible and physical. And so the workings of a clock that actually controls time was part of that, because you could get somebody in there and they could adjust things and move things around, and you could have the clank and sound of it all. And you could, and the thing is that what a clock looks like, and what the workings of a clock look like. So if you put those sounds in, the audience is immediately going to imagine what that space is like. So those are the kind of things that were going through my head. But yeah, it was the brilliant conceit in the Hudsucker Proxy that you stop the clock and time stops, which just delights me. That's still one of my favourite things in a movie ever.
I've never seen it. I must seek it out.
Oh, it's fantastic. It's amazing. It's such a for the Coen Brothers. It's such a sort of feel good movie and so stupid and daft. And I saw it in a cinema with an audience who were just transfixed by it. And you know that joy of the sort of the childish glee it takes in some really high concept daftness. And yeah, and just a happy. It's one of those films where you just think of it and just go, oh, I feel better just for thinking of it.
Philip, what were your thoughts on the third story, Guardian of the Solar System?
Well, once again, I love the double storyline. I was still intrigued by the World War On. I guess the shock value and spoilers, people. I hope you listen to this. The choice to make Sara Kingdom corporeal again, so she actually became the person, was actually a great shock. And in some ways, I really am sorry we didn't get stories with another Doctor, because I think a group of stories with one of the other Doctors would have been marvelous, because to have her as a companion with one of the surviving Doctors could have been a great thing to do. So I'm very sad that didn't happen, because it would have been marvelous. I think this time both stories were intriguing me because I love the Dalek Masterplan so much. It was really intriguing knowing what was going on in that world. But of course, it's such a great exploration of grief and guilt with Brett Ryan bringing back her brother, that for me, it was actually really reflective in terms of, well, how do we deal with past mistakes? And I guess Sarah Kingdom's such a strong character, and yet the emotion was all real. In terms of you believe the fact that she could be mourning her brother, trying to work out, can she change the future, the recognition that this will be the last time she sees him. But to have that chance, I think, those of us who've lost loved ones, the chance to have one more conversation, one more hug, one more time with them, and she gets that. So to me, actually, I found all that very powerfully emotionally, because grief is something that you never get over, but it's always there, but it had bubbles. But she's dealing with guilt and grief, and just those moments she gets with Brett was actually, I found, really powerful scenes. But then you combine that with with Robert and his daughter, and then his daughter leaving, and I at least thought she'd come back. Like, I thought you talk about that once a year she came back and then she stopped, but she just never comes back. And so once again, curious about, well, what is happening in the world? Is she alive? Has she been caught up by the events? Is she now destroyed? All those things I thought was, just so many questions and intrigues, but also a powerful story. It was, the whole three stories, this whole trilogy is just so good, Simon. And it just, every time I listen to it, I get more stuff out of it. And as I get older, I still get different stuff out of it, which is part of the reason it's so well written.
It's funny. I listened to them. I can't remember the last time I heard them, but what struck me is how much they're about what I was going through in my life at the time. At the time I was writing these, me and my wife, well, my wife was going through IVF, which wasn't working, and what were we going to do with our lives? Because everything for years had been concentrating on trying to have children, and there was just this sort of yawning, the other side of that. Once it became clear it wasn't going to work, what do we do with our lives? Because everything has been geared to that, and that there aren't always happy endings, and there aren't always, the kind of things that you're sold on always. But also, what you discover by going through these things is that there's a whole load of stuff that people don't really talk about that are actually quite common, which is grief and loss and disappointments and things that people live with in their day-to-day lives. They just have to carry on, but they're carrying this stuff. And I listen to them kind of going, that's me figuring all of that out and working out what's important in life and what do you want out of life. And So yeah, so it kind of bled through. I wasn't conscious of doing it at the time, but I listen to them now and kind of go, that's where all of that came from. I just kind of, what's the word? I just kind of bled out, really. Sorry, everybody.
Don't apologise. It made for some very good stories.
Oh, powerful stories.
Fantastic stuff. So if there was one abiding memory that you have or feeling that you have of Jean Marsh and the time that you spent with her, what would it be?
Oh, it was the first morning on the Anachronauts where Peter Purvis arrived earlier. So when we did the Anachronauts, I had done 3 stories for Jean Marsh and 3 stories for Peter. And now we were going to do a story with them together. And it was the first time they had met since they had worked together on Doctor Who, I think.
Wow.
And Peter had arrived early and was jittery with nerves. I think it would be fair to say he was basically, he had done some big finishes, but apart from that, he hadn't acted in 40 years, and he was going to be paired with the Emmy Award-winning actress Jean Marsh. And he says it in his autobiography, but that they had a dalliance at the time and hadn't seen each other since. So it was all sorts of things were just a little, how's this going to go? What's this going to be like? And so on. And so Ken, basically, when Jean arrived, he said, look, I'm just going to set, because the actors have to be set up in their booths and make sure their microphone's right and everything's at the right height and the chair's right and all of these things. So he just said to Jean, you get a cup of coffee and get yourself sorted. We're going to set up Peter in the studio and get him sorted, and then we'll come do you. Absolutely fine. And so he did that, came back out, and he said to Jean, Peter's a little nervous. He's not done a lot of acting. He's really good. He's just a little nervous. So, we'll just see how if I am a bit attentive to him as the director, that's why. I'm just making sure he's comfortable. And she was like, yeah, it's fine. In we go into studio, and the opening scene is a TARDIS scene. So it begins with Peter doing a line of narration, or a couple of lines of narration. Then he does a line as the Doctor and a line as Stephen, and then it's Jean's turn. So we go for the record, we go for a take of that. And Peter does his line, he does his narration, he does his Doctor voice, he does his Stephen voice, and then there's a silence. And Jean comes back after a moment and just goes, I'm terribly sorry, I'm so caught up in that. I completely forgot I had a line. That was brilliant, Peter. And he was about 2 foot taller for the rest of the day. It was amazing. And it was such a generous thing to do. Such a practical thing to do, of just to, whatever. And she's absolutely right. He was really good, but it just set the day perfectly, absolutely perfectly. And it was such a what's the word? And she did it with such a twinkle, a mischievous little twinkle about it as well, of just kind of going, oh, I got completely swept up in that. Yeah, it was just a delight, absolute delight. And I thought, if only I could do this forever. That's basically what I thought.
Fantastic. Philip, was there any other thoughts you had on Jean that you wanted to bring up?
No, I mean, as I said, as an actress from afar, I've always admired her. It's always tragic when we lose another Doctor Who alumni, and I'm not sure she probably knew the effects that she had, even though she wasn't in that many television episodes. But I think, any of us grey-haired Doctor Who fans, I think even the young ones, will keep exploring her, discovering her, and she's immortalised, isn't she? That's the thing about the whole Doctor Who, is the fact that new people keep finding it all the time and discovering more and more. And certainly she's an important part of the whole history of the show, and the world's sadder by her loss.
Absolutely. Well, it's been great to look at these 3 companion chronicles. I know you love the range, Philip. And
My
it's been great
favourite
to have you
range.
with us, Simon. So thank you so much for spending so much time with us. Really appreciate
My
it.
pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And until next time, Philip, it's been great being in your company too.
Yours too, Dwayne. Bye, everyone.
This has been the Sirens of Audio, celebrating the life and career of Jean Marsh, with our guest Simon Guerrier and our very special guests Sophie Aldred and Sylvester McCoy, with your hosts Philip Edney and Dwayne Bunny. Theme music by Joe Kramer. Catch up with all the latest info, including news on our live events, at sirensofaudio.com. Got some feedback? Send your email to sirensofaudio@gmail.com or find us on all our social media at Audio Sirens. Thanks for listening, Audiophiles. We'll hear you next time.